The wind howled across the open land like a warning. Cole Brennan pulled on the reins and slowed his horse at the edge of the ridge, squinting into the fading orange light of sunset. That's when he saw her. A lone figure stood in the middle of the empty plain, too small, too fragile against the vastness of the land. She was lifting warped wooden boards, one by one, dragging them across the dirt. Some were cracked, others barely held together. Her hands moved fast, desperate, as if night itself were chasing her. Cole's jaw tightened. Nobody built out there. Not this far from town. Not with scrap wood and no shelter in sight. For 3 years, Cole had trained himself not to care. Since Emma died, the world had become something he managed, not felt. Wake up, feed the horses. Fix the fences, sleep, repeat. Emotions were dangerous. They reminded him of everything he'd lost. But watching this woman struggle against the wind stirred something he hadn't felt in a long time. Concern. She tried to prop 2 boards together. The wind knocked them down instantly. She stumbled, nearly falling, then pushed herself back up. No tears, no screaming, just raw determination. Damn it, Cole muttered under his breath. Night would be brutal out here. The temperature dropped fast after sunset, and storms came without mercy. If she stayed, she could freeze or worse. Still, he didn't move. Helping meant involvement. Involvement meant questions. And questions led to attachments. He turned his horse slightly, ready to head back to the ranch. Then she collapsed to her knees. Not dramatically, just exhausted, like someone who had already fought too many battles that day. Cole exhaled sharply. Emma's voice echoed in his mind, the one he tried so hard to forget. If you see someone hurting and do nothing, that hurts you too. His grip tightened on the reins. Hell with it. He turned the horse around and rode down the slope. The woman looked up when she heard hoofbeats. Fear flashed across her face, but she didn't run. She just stood there, shoulders squared, bracing for whatever was coming. Cole stopped a few feet away. "You won't last the night out here," he said, voice rough from disuse. She swallowed. "I don't have anywhere else to go." The wind roared between them. Cole glanced at the broken boards scattered on the ground, then back at her determined eyes. "Then you're building the wrong shelter," he said. "And you're not doing it alone." Cole didn't ask her name on the way back to the ranch. He rode ahead, the wagon creaking behind him, loaded with fresh lumber tools and a rolled canvas tarp. The woman followed on foot at first, then he helped her up onto the seat without a word. Her hands were cold, he noticed that immediately, but she didn't complain. They reached the open land again just as the sun vanished behind the hills. "You picked a bad spot," Cole said, jumping down and unloading the boards. "Ground's uneven. Wind hits hard from the west." She nodded, listening closely. "It was the only place no one chased me away." That answer landed heavier than he expected. Cole set to work fast. Muscle memory took over, measuring, leveling, driving nails clean and sure. She watched, then mirrored him, learning quickly. Every time she lifted a board, he saw exhaustion in her shoulders, but also stubborn resolve. "What's your name?" he finally asked. "Sarah," she said. "Sarah Atwell." He paused for half a second, then nodded. "Cole." No last names. No pasts. The wind picked up as darkness settled in. But the shelter began to take shape, 4 solid walls, braced corners, a slanted roof reinforced with tarp and spare tin. Not pretty, but strong, safe. Sarah's hands shook as she tied the last knot. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly. Cole wiped sweat from his brow. Someone should have. Thunder rolled in the distance. They worked faster. By the time rain began to fall, the shelter stood firm. Inside it was cramped, smelling of fresh wood and wet earth, but it was dry. Sarah sank onto the floor, breathless. For the first time, her strength cracked. She pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes burning. Cole stepped outside, giving her space. He stared out into the storm, rain soaking his hat, feeling something unfamiliar tightening in his chest. It wasn't pity. It was purpose. The storm lasted most of the night. Cole stayed nearby, sitting under the lean-to he'd rigged beside the shelter, listening to the rain pound against the boards. More than once, he checked the structure, reinforcing weak points, making sure nothing gave way. At dawn, the storm finally broke. Sarah stepped out slowly, blinking at the pale morning light. She looked different, still tired, still worn, but alive. Standing. "It held," she said, almost in disbelief. Cole nodded. "Told you it would." She hesitated, then spoke. "I was supposed to leave town weeks ago. The bank took my father's land after he died. Thought I owed more than I could ever pay. I thought, if I built something, anything, I could start over." Cole said nothing. He understood loss better than most. "You can't stay out here," he said finally. "Not alone." Sarah stiffened. "I don't want charity." Didn't offer any. He met her gaze. "I need help on the ranch. Hard work, long days. Pays fair." She studied him, suspicion flickering. "Why?" Cole looked past her, toward the distant hills where his ranch lay quiet and empty. "Because empty places don't fix themselves." The word surprised even him. Sarah nodded slowly. "I can work. I figured you could." He helped her pack what little she had. When they rode back together, the land felt different to Cole, not so hollow, as if something had shifted during the night. But as the ranch came into view, he knew something else too. Bringing her home would raise questions. Whispers, judgments, trouble. Still, for the first time in 3 years, Cole didn't turn away from what was coming. He rode straight toward it. The ranch had never felt so loud. Not because of noise, but because of presence. Sarah moved through the yard with quiet focus, rolling up her sleeves, taking in every detail. The broken fence, the half-empty stable, the porch that hadn't been swept in months. She didn't criticize. She didn't ask questions. She just picked up a hammer and went to work. Cole watched from the barn doorway, arms crossed. Emma used to do that, he thought. See what needed fixing without saying a word. By midday, the place already looked different, cleaner, lighter, as if the land itself noticed the effort and responded. "You don't have to prove anything," Cole said when she refused to stop working. "I'm not," Sarah replied. "I'm earning my place." That word place hit him harder than he expected. In town, the reaction came fast. Cole felt it the moment he rode in for supplies with Sarah beside him. Conversations stopped. Eyes followed. A woman alone didn't walk into Brennan Ranch without setting tongues loose. "That her?" Someone whispered near the feed store. "Poor girl," another voice said. "Or clever." Sarah kept her head high, but Cole noticed her grip tighten on the reins. Outside the bank, the clerk smirked. "Didn't know you were hiring strays now, Brennan." Cole leaned closer, voice low. "Didn't know you were still counting other men's business." The smirk faded. On the ride back, Sarah finally spoke. "You don't owe me defense." Cole didn't look at her. "I don't owe them silence." The ranch gate creaked open as they returned, but the peace didn't follow them inside. Cole knew the whispers would grow. The town loved simple stories. A widower, a young woman, easy conclusions. That night, as Sarah ate quietly at the table across from him, Cole realized something else. Letting her stay was the easy part. Standing with her would cost him far more. The tension didn't break, it settled in. Every day, Sarah worked harder than anyone Cole had ever hired. She rose before sunrise, fed the animals, repaired fences, learned the rhythms of the land. She listened more than she spoke. And when she did speak, it was thoughtful, respectful. Still, the town watched. The pastor came first. He stood at the edge of the porch one afternoon, hat in hand, eyes kind but searching. "People are talking, Cole." Cole leaned against the railing. "They always do. She's young, alone, they'll assume things. And if they do?" The pastor smiled faintly. "Then they'll be wrong. But wrong ideas can still wound." Sarah overheard none of it. She was too busy fixing a gate that hadn't closed properly in years. Later that evening, Cole found her sitting on the steps, staring at the horizon. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door," she said quietly. Cole sat beside her. "This door's seen worse." She hesitated. "Why are you really helping me?" The question hung between them, heavy and honest. Cole thought of the empty rooms, the silence after dark, the way grief had turned his life into maintenance instead of meaning. "Because losing everything shouldn't mean losing everyone," he said. Sarah nodded, eyes shining, but she didn't cry. That night, the ranch felt less like a shelter and more like a home. Not finished, not perfect, but alive. Still, Cole knew the calm wouldn't last. Banks don't forgive debts. Towns don't forgive rumors. And men like him didn't get second chances without a fight. As he locked the barn doors and looked toward the house, Cole made a quiet decision. Whatever came next, he wouldn't face it alone. The letter arrived on a Monday morning, tucked between routine invoices and advertisements that suddenly felt meaningless. Cole recognized the bank seal instantly. Thick paper, sharp edges, no warmth. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he stood at the kitchen table, fingers resting on the envelope, as if delaying the inevitable might somehow soften it. When he finally read it, his chest tightened. Final notice. Outstanding balance. Immediate action required. The words were clean, professional, merciless. Cole folded the letter slowly and slipped it into his jacket pocket. But the weight didn't leave him. It pressed deeper with every step he took outside, where the land stretched wide and familiar as land. Emma's land. A place built with sweat, loss, and promises that were never meant to expire. Sarah noticed the change before noon. She always did. "You're quieter than usual," she said, handing him a tool as they worked the fence line. Cole avoided her eyes. "Just paperwork." But paperwork had teeth. By afternoon, the tension followed them into town. At the feed store, conversations died the moment they entered. Eyes lingered longer than before. No one bothered to whisper anymore. "She's the reason he's in trouble," someone said openly. Sarah stiffened, but she didn't respond. She paid, nodded politely, and walked out with her head held high. Only when they were outside did her hands begin to shake. That night, Cole found her in the barn. She was packing. The same small bag she'd arrived with. The same few possessions. Neatly folded, controlled, as if she'd been preparing for this moment all along. "I can't stay," she said before he could speak. "They're already blaming me. I won't let you lose everything because of me." Cole stepped forward, heart pounding. "You think leaving fixes that?" "It fixes the story," she replied. "They need someone to point at. If I'm gone, they'll stop." Cole shook his head slowly. "I didn't bring you here to be convenient." Sarah finally looked at him then. "Then why did you?" The answer burned behind his ribs, dangerous, honest. "Because you reminded me how to live." But he swallowed it. Instead, he said, "Because this ranch isn't just mine anymore. Outside, The wind rose again, rattling the barn walls. Sarah exhaled, shoulders trembling, not in fear, but in resolve. "Then we don't run," she said. "We stand." And for the first time since the letter arrived, Cole believed it was possible. The bank smelled of ink, dust, and impatience. Cole felt it the moment he stepped inside. That familiar chill of a place where human lives were reduced to columns and signatures. Sarah walked beside him, shoulders straight, chin lifted. She wasn't supposed to be there. The banker made that clear with a single raised eyebrow. "This meeting concerns Mr. Brennan," he said coldly. "Then he won't be speaking alone," Sarah replied, sitting anyway. The men across the desk exchanged looks. Cole remained silent, letting her presence do what words couldn't. The banker folded his hands. "You are in arrears. Sentiment does not change numbers." Sarah leaned forward. Numbers didn't bury his wife. Numbers didn't build that ranch. People did. A pause, sharp, uncomfortable. "You seized land from my father when he was dying," she continued. "Promised flexibility. Delivered paperwork. You won't do that here." The banker scoffed. "And who are you to make such demands?" Sarah met his gaze without blinking. Someone who knows what happens when decent people stop standing up. Outside the bank, the conversation had already begun to spread. The pastor was the first to speak openly. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He simply reminded people of what the ranch had always meant: jobs in hard winters, help after storms, a place that never turned anyone away. Others followed. A neighbor delayed payment. Another offered labor. Small gestures, quiet but deliberate. The balance shifted, not enough to win, but enough to resist. That night, rain returned. Inside the house, Sarah finally told Cole everything. About the father who worked until his heart failed. About the debt that grew faster than grief. About sleeping in places where no one expected her to stay. Cole listened, hands clenched, jaw tight, not with anger, but recognition. When she finished, he said softly, "You belong here." Sarah swallowed. "So do you." The rain eased before dawn. The bank hadn't surrendered. The town hadn't fully changed. The threat remained. But the ranch stood surrounded by something it hadn't had before. Witnesses, allies, and two people who refused to be pushed back into silence. And that made all the difference. The ultimatum arrived without ceremony. No knock, no warning. Just an envelope wedged into the doorframe, fluttering in the morning wind like a final insult. Cole read it standing in the yard, boots sinking into the damp earth. 7 days. That was all the bank allowed before moving to seize the land. No meetings, no mercy. Just a date, stamped and signed. Carrying the quiet confidence of people who believed resistance was pointless. Cole folded the letter carefully, but his hands trembled. This land had raised him, buried Emma, given him something solid to hold onto when everything else fell apart. Losing it wouldn't just mean starting over. It would mean erasing the last proof that his life had once made sense. Sarah found him at the fence line, eyes already searching his face. "It's worse," she said, not asking. Cole nodded. "They're done waiting." For a long moment, they stood in silence, watching the cattle move slowly across the pasture, unaware of deadlines or debts. "They expect you to quit," Sarah said finally. "That's how they win." Cole exhaled. "They usually do." The day unfolded like a test of endurance. Neighbors arrived unannounced, bringing tools, spare lumber, hands ready to work. Fences were repaired, roofs reinforced, not out of optimism but defiance. Still, Cole knew it wouldn't be enough. By evening, he made the choice he'd been avoiding. "I'm selling the west pasture," he told Sarah as they stood in the stable. It'll cover most of what we owe. Sarah turned sharply. That land feeds the herd. It's not just acreage, it's survival. It keeps the rest of the ranch breathing, Cole replied. Sometimes you cut to save. Sarah stepped closer, voice low but fierce. You taught me not to build on broken foundations. Selling your future to pay for the past is exactly that. Cole looked away, jaw tight. I won't lose everything. She softened, placing a hand against the stall door. You already almost did. And you're still standing. She took a breath. There's another way. Cole met her eyes. Say it. We open the ranch, she said. Not as charity. As purpose, training, work, shelter, something the bank can't measure. It was risky, exposed, terrifying. It was hope. That night Cole didn't sleep. At sunrise, he saddled his horse and rode toward town, not to beg, but to challenge the rules that had never been fair to begin with. The town hall had never been this full. People stood along the walls, filled the aisles, leaned in doorways. Farmers with cracked hands. Families who had weathered the same storms. Even those who once whispered now listened in uneasy silence. Cole stepped forward first. His voice was steady. Though his pulse wasn't, he spoke about the debt without excuses. About the land, not as property, but as history. About what happens when places like this disappear quietly, one foreclosure at a time. Then Sarah moved beside him. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't plead. She told the truth. About her father. About promises made and broken. About how losing everything didn't hurt, as much as being treated like you never mattered at all. She spoke of work not shelter given, but dignity earned. The room changed. People leaned forward. Faces softened. Murmurs replaced skepticism. When the banker arrived late, he paused at the back, sensing the shift. He walked in with confidence, but it faltered when he saw the papers already on the table. Partnership agreements, witness statements, commitments signed in ink that couldn't be erased by a single office decision. This won't hold, the banker warned. You're delaying the inevitable. Cole met his eyes. We're redefining it. The banker scoffed, but the sound lacked conviction. He left without another word. The following days blurred together. Inspections, forms, long nights. Doubt creeping in when exhaustion set deep. But the momentum didn't break. Each signature pulled another. Each person who stayed added weight. On the final morning, the deadline passed without fanfare. No trucks arrived. No locks were changed. No notice was posted. Sarah stood on the porch, watching the road as the sun rose. They're not coming, she whispered. Cole nodded, breath catching. They can't. She turned to him. What now? Cole took her hand, firm and certain, the gesture simple but final. Now we stop surviving. The land stretched before them scarred, imperfect, alive. They hadn't beaten the system. They'd outgrown it. And that was a victory no document could undo. The ranch no longer woke up in silence. Morning arrived with movement, now boots crossing the porch. Voices calling out tasks. The soft rhythm of work beginning before the sun fully cleared the hills. Where there had once been only routine, there was intention. Where there had been survival, there was purpose. Cole stood near the fence, hands resting on the weathered wood. Watching Sarah guide two newcomers through the careful repair of a broken rail. She didn't rush them. She corrected gently, the kind of patience that came from believing. People were worth the time it took to teach them. The ranch responded to her presence. Fences held. Animals settled. The land itself seemed to breathe easier. Cole barely recognized the place. And if he was honest, he barely recognized himself either. 3 years earlier, grief had stripped him. down to function alone. Wake, sleep, repeat. Feeling had been dangerous then. Feeling meant remembering. Remembering meant pain. So he had learned to live quietly, efficiently, without asking for more. But somewhere between a broken shelter on the open plains and a stand against the bank, that life had ended. Not suddenly, not dramatically, slowly, truthfully. Emma would have liked this, he thought. The realization surprised him, not with pain, but with warmth. Her memory no longer felt like an open wound. It felt like a foundation. The pastor visited again that afternoon. He leaned on the fence beside Cole, surveying the work with quiet approval. "You didn't just protect land," he said. "You created a place where people remember who they are." Cole glanced toward Sarah, laughing softly with the others. She did. As evening settled in, Sarah joined him at the edge of the field. The sky stretched wide, painted in gold and soft blue. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked. Cole shook his head slowly. "Not anymore." She considered that. "I stayed at first because I had nowhere else. Then because the work mattered." She smiled faintly. "Now it feels like choosing." Cole turned to face her fully. "It is." They stood together in the fading light, the land stretching endlessly before them. This place had been built from loss, but it was no longer defined by it. The first winter tested everything they had built. Snow came early and stayed late, pressing heavy against the roofs, sealing roads, turning every simple task into labor. Supplies thinned, tempers rose. A few people left quietly, deciding this life demanded more than they could give. No one blamed them. What remained was stronger. Sarah met each challenge head-on, never asking more of others than she demanded of herself. Cole stood beside her, not above her. Decisions were made together, sometimes wrong, sometimes costly, but always honest. And slowly, trust replaced fear. On the coldest night of the season, the power failed. Darkness filled the house, followed by nervous laughter and the scrape of chairs as people gathered in the main room. Candles were lit, breath fogged the air. Someone began telling a story about a winter long ago, and soon another voice joined in. Then laughter. Cole sat near the fireplace, watching the flickering light dance across familiar faces. Not employees, not dependents, family. Sarah settled beside him, her shoulder brushing his. The contact was small, unremarkable, yet it grounded him more than words ever could. "Do you ever regret stopping that day?" she asked softly. "On the ridge." Cole considered the question carefully. He thought of the man he had been, closed, cautious, convinced that isolation was the same as strength. He thought of the moment everything changed. One choice, one refusal to look away. "No," he said. "That was the first brave thing I'd done in a long time." Sarah smiled, not performative, just true. Outside, the storm passed, leaving behind a clean, silent world. Spring would come. New problems would follow. Nothing about this life promised ease or permanence. But the foundation was solid, not because it had been built with perfect boards or legal victories, but because it had been built with dignity, shared labor, and the courage to care when walking away would have been easier. Cole looked around the room one last time and understood something he hadn't in years. Home wasn't a place you owned. It was a place you chose. And this was home. Snow slashed across the ridge like knives as Cole Dawson staggered toward the barn. Each step burned. Fever pulsed through his body, blurring his vision and stealing his breath. The ranch, once loud with life, lay silent under the weight of winter. Only the desperate stamping of horses echoed from inside the barn. Cole grabbed the frozen rail, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Not from the cold, but from the sickness he had ignored for days. Inside, the horses were thin, restless, their ribs showing beneath dull coats. Guilt tightened his chest. They depended on him, and he was failing them. "I can handle this," he muttered, though the words sounded hollow even to him. Pride had kept him alive for years. Pride and isolation. He dragged a bale of hay forward, but dizziness hit him hard. The world tilted. His knees buckled, and he crashed onto the barn floor. Hay scattering as a horse reared back in alarm. Pain shot through his body as he struggled to rise, breath ragged, heart pounding. "No, not like this," he gasped. The storm outside roared louder. Snow forced its way through the cracks in the walls. Cola's strength drained fast, his limbs heavy and unresponsive. He lay there, staring at the rafters, knowing the truth he had refused to face if no one came. Neither he nor the horses would survive the winter. Then, through the howl of the wind, another sound cut through the chaos. Footsteps, crunching snow, steady, close. The barn door creaked open. A figure stood against the white storm grace porter. Snow clung to her long coat, her face set with quiet determination. "Cola," she called. "You need help." "I'm fine," he rasped automatically, though his body betrayed him. Grace crossed the barn without hesitation and knelt beside him. Her hand pressed to his forehead, her expression tightening. "You're burning up," she said firmly. "And these horses are starving." She didn't wait for permission. She moved fast, feeding the horses, calming them, restoring order where chaos had taken hold. When she returned, she held out water. Cola hesitated, pride flaring one last time, then his trembling hand accepted it. Warmth spread through him, not just from the water, but from her presence. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside the barn, something shifted. The walls Cola had built around himself cracked, just enough to let in relief. And the terrifying realization that he was no longer alone. For the first time in years, survival no longer depended on standing alone, but on trusting someone else to stand beside him. The wind outside the barn showed no mercy, hurling snow against the wooden walls with relentless force. Inside, Grace moved with quiet precision, shoveling feed into the troughs. Cola lay on the hay-covered floor, wrapped in a thin blanket, shivering despite the heat burning through his body. His fever still held him in its grip. Yet he kept his eyes open, watching her every move. "You shouldn't have come," he croaked, his voice weak and strained. "You'll catch the cold. This winter takes enough from people already." Grace didn't stop working. "I've lived through harsher winters than this," she said calmly. "You're the one in danger, Cola, and so are these horses." Her words cut deeper than the wind outside. For years, Cola had defined himself by endurance and independence. Needing help had never been an option. Now lying helpless on the barn floor, that belief felt hollow. Grace turned toward him, her gaze steady. "You can't do everything alone. That's not weakness. That's reality." He swallowed, pride burning in his chest. Every instinct told him to refuse, to insist he could manage. But the thin horses shifting restlessly in their stalls, and the tremor in his own hands betrayed him. They worked in silence for a while. Grace fed the horses, spoke to them softly, steadied the weakest among them. The barn filled with the scent of hay and pine from her coat. Slowly, something unfamiliar settled in Cola's chest thrust. Fragile and uneasy. Outside, distant figures moved. Along the ridge road, neighbors, watching. In a town like this, nothing went unnoticed. Grace knew it too. She had already felt the sting of sideways glances and quiet judgment. Still, she stayed. Cola noticed. The way she didn't rush. The way she never hesitated. By nightfall, the horses were fed. And Cola managed to sit up, leaning against a stack of hay. Exhaustion weighed on him, but his voice was steady when he finally asked, "Why are you doing this?" Grace sat beside him. "Because it's right. And because kindness isn't measured by what people say." Her words lingered long after she returned to her work. For the first time in months, Kola felt something break through the walls he had built, an understanding that survival didn't have to mean standing alone. The following morning, a brittle sunlight cut through the frost, casting long shadows across the Dawson Ranch. Kola rose slowly, his muscles stiff, his fever lingering but diminished. Grace was already outside, clearing a patch of snow so that the horses could reach fresh grass. The sound of her movements was steady, disciplined, a rhythm that seemed to soothe the tension coiling inside him. "Morning," she said softly, not looking up. "The horses need more than just yesterday's hay. Their strength won't wait for pride to catch up." Kola moved toward her, each step heavy but purposeful. I could have done it myself." Grace finally glanced at him, her expression patient but firm. "You couldn't, and you didn't. That's why I'm here." He felt a surge of frustration, a twinge of anger at his own helplessness, but also something else, gratitude, complicated and stubborn. He turned away from her briefly, staring across the snow-blanketed fields. The distant hum of the town carried faint voices, laughter, and murmurs, reminders that the world beyond the barn was watching. Word would spread soon. They always did in small towns like this. "People are talking," he muttered, not entirely to himself. They'll say you shouldn't be helping me, that you're foolish." Grace's eyes softened, though her resolve never wavered. Let them talk. Their words don't feed horses, and they don't save people. "I'm not here for them, Kola. I'm here for you and the animals." He swallowed, feeling the weight of her conviction pressing against his pride. The storm of judgment he had feared now seemed trivial compared to the reality of the warmth and care she offered. Yet he couldn't shake the unease gnawing at the edges of his mind. How could she face their scrutiny without faltering? How could she place herself in the middle of small-town gossip just to help him? Grace approached him, placing a gloved hand on his arm. "This is about more than people's opinions. It's about doing what matters. And right now, what matters is saving lives and hearts too." The words struck him harder than any fever or storm. Hearts, not just the horses, not just the farm, but his own heart, long shielded by walls of pride and solitude. He felt something he had not felt in years, vulnerability. And alongside it, a flicker of trust, fragile but undeniable. For a moment, they simply stood there, the winter sunlight glinting off the snow, the world beyond the farm fading into irrelevance. Kola realized that survival was no longer a matter of enduring alone. It was about accepting the unexpected, about letting someone else share the burden. Grace's presence was quiet but insistent, a living reminder that help, and perhaps even love, could come when least expected, but only if he dared to open his heart. Days passed under a sky heavy with frost and silence. Kola was slowly regaining strength, though every movement reminded him how close he had come to losing everything. Grace remained at his side, steady and focused, her presence as constant as the winter cold. She worked without complaint, anticipating what needed to be done before he could speak. That morning, Kola shoveled hay into the troughs while Grace guided the horses closer. The rhythm felt natural, now shared, balanced. Then the wind shifted, carrying voices across the frozen fields. Kola froze. He recognized them instantly, neighbors. "Grace," he said quietly. "They're watching." She didn't turn around. "Let them." At the edge of the property, figures stood clustered together, their silhouettes sharp against the snow. In a town this small, nothing stayed private. Kola could already imagine the whispers forming, the judgment taking shape. A widowed woman helping a solitary man. Too often, too closely. His jaw tightened. "I don't need this," he muttered. People talking. Grace finally faced him, her expression calm but firm. "You don't live for their approval. Neither do I. What matters is what's happening here." The voices drifted closer, fragments carried by the wind questions. Doubts, quiet accusations. Kola felt the old shame rising. The instinct to retreat and push her away before the judgment could cut deeper. But Grace didn't falter. She fed the horses with steady hands, spoke to them softly, ignored the watching eyes beyond the fence. Her refusal to bend unsettled him in a way that felt dangerous and necessary. Kola watched her move through the barn, confident and unafraid, and something shifted. For years he had mistaken isolation for strength. Now he saw another kind of courage, the courage to stay, to help, to stand firm despite scrutiny. As the sun dipped lower, the neighbors eventually drifted away, their curiosity unsatisfied. The barn grew quiet again. Kola exhaled slowly, realizing he hadn't asked Grace to leave. Hadn't wanted to. Snow began to fall heavier, muffling the world outside. Inside, the horses ate calmly, and the tension eased. Kola leaned against the stall door, exhausted but steady. For the first time, the whispers no longer felt like a threat. They felt distant, small compared to the warmth growing inside the barn. And in that quiet, Kola understood something unsettling and hopeful all at once. Letting someone stand beside him did not make him weaker. It was teaching him how to endure and perhaps how to live differently. That night, the barn was quiet. The only sound the soft rustle of hay and the occasional low nicker of a horse. Kola sat on the edge of a wooden crate, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, feeling the ache in his muscles and the warmth in his chest, a warmth that came not from the fire, but from Grace's steady presence. "You should rest," she said softly, placing a lantern beside him. The soft glow painted her face in warm tones against the harsh winter outside. "You've done enough today." Kola hesitated, the words caught in his throat. Pride, stubborn as ice, fought against the admission he felt creeping forward. I don't know how to thank you." Grace smiled faintly, shaking her head. "You don't need to. Seeing them fed, seeing you safe, that's thanks enough. That's what matters." He looked at her, really looked. For the first time without the blur of fever or the rush of daily chores. There was resolve in her eyes, but also warmth, patience, and understanding. She had not come to judge him or lecture him. She had come simply to care. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying faint voices from the distant town. Kola's chest tightened. The whispers had grown louder in his absence. Small-town suspicion circling around Grace's kindness. He felt anger rise, but also a protective instinct he could not ignore. "Let them talk," he said finally, his voice firmer than he expected. "If they have nothing better to do than gossip about you helping me, that's their burden, not ours." Grace's eyes softened, and she reached out, briefly touching his arm. "Exactly. Our focus is here on life, on care, on what matters." The moment stretched, quiet yet charged. Kola realized how deeply he had depended on her presence over the past days, not just physically, but emotionally. The isolation he had clung to for so long, the pride that had kept him alone, felt like a distant memory. A low nicker drew their attention to the horses. One of the younger animals, weak and skittish, approached the trough hesitantly. Grace guided it gently, her hands steady, her voice calm. Kola watched her, understanding that care was not just an action, it was a bridge, connecting hearts and mending walls that had long been thought unbreakable. By the time the night fully settled, Kola felt something he hadn't felt in years, a fragile hope. Perhaps the storm outside, the cold, the snow. The whispers was not as insurmountable as he had believed. Perhaps life could be shared, burdens carried together, and pride tempered by trust. He didn't speak the words aloud, but as he watched Grace tuck a loose blanket over the horses and the lantern, light flicker across her determined face, he knew one truth: he was beginning to let someone in. And that alone, in a winter of cold and whispers, felt like a miracle. Snow had settled into thick layers, blanketing the Dawson Ranch in a silence both beautiful and unforgiving. Kola moved slowly, each step a reminder of how weak he had become during his illness. Yet his pride kept him upright, insisting he could handle the work. Grace followed closely, carrying a bucket of feed with an ease born of experience, her eyes scanning the horizon as if anticipating trouble before it arrived. "Let me help," Kola said, his voice hoarse but firm. He gestured toward the troughs. "You shouldn't be doing everything." Grace smiled softly, shaking her head. "You've done your part today. Let me handle the rest. I've got this." Kola's chest tightened. Pride warred with gratitude. He hated feeling helpless, yet he could not deny the relief that came from her presence. The barn had become more than a shelter from the storm. It was a sanctuary, a place where his body and spirit could recover. Yet the ghosts of the past lingered. He thought of his late wife, her laughter, the warmth that once filled the farmhouse. Her absence was a cold, unyielding weight pressing against his heart. And for years, that loss had defined his solitude. Now with Grace here, that solitude was challenged in ways he was unprepared for. The thought of opening his heart to someone else, even in the simple act of trusting her, felt like betrayal, but also like survival. Outside, the town whispered. He knew that neighbors were watching, speculating, perhaps even condemning Grace's involvement. A few would see only a woman overstepping her place, caring for a man who had isolated himself for too long. But Kola realized something crucial. Their judgment held no power inside the barn, where trust and care mattered far more than gossip. As he shoveled hay into the troughs, Grace guided the younger horses toward the water trough. Her hands moved with precision, her voice calm, coaxing the frightened animals with gentle words. Kola paused, watching her, and something within him shifted. He understood that her persistence was not just an act of kindness, it was a lesson, a bridge toward reclaiming what he had lost: connection, warmth, and hope. The afternoon light began to fade, the sky tinged with pale orange and gray. Snowflakes fell steadily, dusting the barn and the fields beyond. Kola felt a mix of exhaustion and anticipation, a strange energy that came from participating in life rather than merely surviving it. "Grace," he said quietly, his voice carrying a hint of vulnerability he seldom allowed himself to reveal. "Why do you keep coming back?" Her eyes softened. "Because someone has to. Because what matters isn't what others think, but what we do when it counts." "You're not alone, Kola. Not anymore." For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft sounds of the horses and the wind. Kola realized he had never felt anything like this in years, a blend of gratitude, admiration, and something deeper that he did not yet understand. The next morning, Kola awoke to the faint sound of voices carried on the crisp winter air. He dressed quickly, knowing that Grace had already begun feeding the horses. As he stepped outside, the frost crunching beneath his boots, he saw a small group of neighbors gathered at the edge of the property, peering across the snow-covered fields. Kola's first instinct was to retreat, to hide behind the barn and reclaim the isolation he had clung to for so long. But as he watched, he noticed something he hadn't before. Grace continued her work, unfazed by the curious eyes, tending to the animals with a steady, determination that left him both awed and deeply grateful. "Let them watch," he muttered under his breath, the words foreign but freeing. He walked toward the horses, bucket in hand, and began assisting Grace with a newfound resolve. The act itself felt revolutionary, an acknowledgement that he could accept help without shame, that he could participate in life rather than retreat from it. The neighbors whispered, their voices rising and falling like the wind through the frozen trees. Some murmured disapproval, others curiosity, but Kola noticed a subtle shift. A few watched with respect, perhaps even admiration, for the woman who dared to defy judgment for the sake of care. Grace paused, glancing at him. Her eyes met his, a silent exchange passing between them. No words were necessary. The bond was clear, forged in the heat of shared effort, trust and quiet courage. Kola felt a swell of emotion, a mix of pride and humility, realizing that the walls around his heart had begun to crack. As they worked together, the harsh winter seemed less imposing. The barn, the horses, and the snow-covered fields became a stage for something greater, a testament to resilience, trust, and the subtle power of kindness in a world often quick to judge. By the time the sun reached its peak, Kola and Grace had finished their morning chores. He stood for a moment, gazing across the fields, feeling the cold biting at his cheeks but warming from within. He realized that survival was no longer just a solitary battle, it was a shared endeavor, strengthened by care, trust, and the courage to face judgment together. For the first time in years, Kola allowed himself to hope. Hope not only for the survival of his ranch and the well-being of his horses, but for something more elusive yet vital. The possibility of a life shared, a heart opened, and a future built alongside someone who had chosen to see him not as a stubborn, lonely rancher, but as a man capable of love and connection once again. The frost hung thick in the air, coating every branch, every fence post, and every hoof print with a crystalline layer. Kola woke early, feeling the ache in his muscles, a reminder of both his recent illness and the weight of responsibility that came with the ranch. Yet, for the first time in months, that weight felt manageable, shared by someone who refused to be pushed away. Grace was already in the barn, moving with a quiet determination that seemed unstoppable. She hummed softly as she worked, filling the troughs, brushing down the horses, and carefully checking each animal for signs of illness or injury. Her hands were steady, her movements confident. Yet there was a gentleness that even the most skittish horse seemed to recognize. Kola stepped inside, holding a stack of hay bales. "I can do this part," he said, trying to mask both his fatigue and the lingering pride that refused to be completely subdued. Grace looked up and smiled, a subtle warmth in her gaze. "I know you can, Kola. That's why I'm letting you." Her words were simple, but they carried an unspoken truth. This was more than chores. It was trust, and trust required him to participate, to step beyond his solitude. As they worked together, the cold outside seemed to retreat, replaced by a rhythm of cooperation and quiet understanding. The horses ate, the barn smelled of hay and warmth, and for a moment, the world beyond the ranch, the whispers, the judgment, the small-town gossip felt distant and inconsequential. But reality was never far. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. A neighbor, eyes sharp, lips pursed. "I see you're at it again," the woman said, her voice carrying a mix of curiosity and disapproval. "Helping him? All winter long? Don't you have your own life to mind?" Kola stiffened, the old defensiveness rising. But Grace's calm presence steadied him. She met the neighbor's gaze without hesitation. "I am helping because it's needed. If you choose to mind your own life, that's your choice, but don't judge what you don't understand." The neighbor hesitated, taken aback by her firmness, and then muttered something about unusual priorities before retreating. Kola watched them leave, a mixture of frustration and relief swirling inside him. The judgment of others was inevitable, but he now understood that it no longer defined him. Turning back to the horses, he felt Grace's hand brush his arm, a fleeting, deliberate touch. It was an acknowledgement, a reassurance, and a subtle invitation into a closeness he hadn't dared to imagine. For the first time, Kola allowed himself to feel not just gratitude, but something more. Connection, fragile yet real, growing quietly in the midst of snow, wind, and whispered criticism. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened, heavy with clouds that promised more snow. Inside the barn, Kola and Grace worked in a seamless rhythm. Their movements synchronized in ways that required neither words nor explanations. Each glance, each gesture, spoke volumes, an understanding born of shared effort, trust, and mutual respect. "Thank you," Kola said quietly, pausing to brush a layer of frost from the back of a horse's coat. His voice was low, almost vulnerable, and Grace looked at him, recognizing the depth behind his words. "You don't need to thank me," she replied softly. "The work itself is enough. Seeing them fed, seeing you stand strong again, that's thanks enough for me." The barn was quiet except for the soft sounds of the animals, the wind whistling through cracks in the walls. Kola felt an unfamiliar warmth settle in his chest, a combination of relief, trust, and something far more elusive, hope. He had spent years alone, clinging to pride and self-reliance, but now, in the presence of someone who refused to abandon him, he felt a fragile possibility of something he had long denied himself: companionship. A sudden gust rattled the barn doors, reminding them of the storm outside. Kola felt a shiver run through him, not from cold, but from a recognition of how precarious life could be. And yet, he no longer feared it alone. Grace's presence beside him was a shield, not from the world, but from the isolation he had carried for so long. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her touch grounding him. "We'll get through this winter," she said firmly, yet with warmth. Together. Kola nodded, his throat tight, words failing him. For the first time, he realized that accepting help, accepting care, was not weakness, it was courage. The courage to trust, to open his heart, to acknowledge that life was not meant to be endured in isolation. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the faint whispers of townspeople who had watched the barn from afar. Kola did not flinch. Their judgments, their gossip, no longer held power over him. Inside the barn, amid the horses and the warmth, a bond had been forged, one that could withstand cold, criticism, and years of solitude. As the night settled, Kola allowed himself a small, quiet smile. For the first time in a long while, he felt the stirrings of something he had thought lost forever: trust, companionship, and the possibility of love. And in that fragile hope, he found strength, not just to survive, but to live again, heart open, alongside someone who had chosen to see him fully, without hesitation, without fear. The frost had deepened into a crisp, white silence over the Dawson Ranch. Christmas lights twinkled faintly along the edges of the barn, a warm glow against the relentless winter darkness. Kola stood by the doorway, looking out over the snow-covered fields, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air. The barn behind him smelled of hay, horses, and the faint scent of pine from the small tree Grace had placed near the feed corner. He could hear the soft shuffle of her boots on the straw-strewn floor. Grace had been up since dawn, tending to the horses, checking the feed, and ensuring that everything was ready for the small holiday gathering they had quietly decided upon. Kola felt the familiar stir of pride, but now it was tempered with gratitude, humility, and something more fragile: more powerful, courage. "Morning," she said softly, her smile gentle but full of warmth. "Ready to face the day?" Kola nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Yes, and thank you for everything." Grace's gaze softened. "You don't need to thank me. You've done the hard part, you've let me in. That's the greatest gift." Her words lingered, echoing in the quiet of the barn. Kola realized that letting someone in had been his greatest challenge all these years, far harder than any winter storm or illness. He had built walls of solitude and pride, believing that independence was the only path. But standing there, watching Grace move among the horses, seeing her quiet strength and unyielding care, he understood that life's warmth and meaning came not from enduring alone, but from trust, kindness, and shared burdens. The distant hum of townspeople approaching carried faint voices, a mixture of curiosity and surprise. The word had spread. Grace had tended to the sick rancher and his horses, ignoring judgment and gossip. Kola felt a pang of anxiety, his old instincts whispering caution, but he pushed it aside. Today was not about others' opinions, it was about honesty, gratitude, and courage. Grace looked at him, sensing the shift in his demeanor. "Kola, are you ready?" she asked, her tone both gentle and insistent. He took a deep breath, feeling the frost bite at his cheeks, and nodded. "I am. It's time I face this." Together, they stepped outside into the pale morning light, the snow crunching beneath their boots. The small crowd of neighbors paused, watching the pair emerge from the barn. Kola felt the weight of their stares, the whispers hovering in the cold air. Yet he stood tall, the years of isolation and pride no longer defining him. He cleared his throat, voice carrying steadily over the crisp silence. "I want everyone to know. I was wrong to shut myself away. I was wrong to let pride blind me to help, to kindness, to care. Grace has shown me what it means to survive and to live with heart open. I am grateful, more than words can say." A hush fell over the crowd, the weight of his admission settling across the snowy field. The small gathering moved closer, smiles forming as neighbors realized the truth of Kola's words. What they had once whispered about in judgment and doubt now became a testament to resilience, kindness, and the courage to act despite fear of opinion. Some murmured apologies for their earlier suspicion. Others simply nodded in quiet admiration. Kola felt an unfamiliar lightness in his chest, a release from the years of isolation he had carried like a second skin. The barn, once a place of solitary labor and quiet despair, now felt alive, filled with warmth, hope, and the soft stirrings of community. Yet it was not just the presence of others that mattered, it was Grace, standing beside him, steadfast and unwavering, the embodiment of care that had healed more than his body. He looked at her, truly looked, and spoke the words he had withheld for so long. "Grace, you saved more than my horses. You saved me. I can't imagine facing another winter without you." Her smile was radiant, soft yet strong, the kind that warmed the coldest corners of the soul. "You don't have to. You never will again." The horses shifted, nickered softly, sensing the common connection between the two humans who had fought alongside them. Kola reached out, brushing the mane of his oldest horse, feeling life returning in layers he hadn't dared to imagine. The bond between man, woman, and animals had become a fragile yet unbreakable network of trust and care. The sun broke briefly through the clouds, dusting the snow with pale gold. Kola inhaled deeply, the crisp air filling his lungs, and realized something profound. Life, once defined by solitude and stubborn pride, was now defined by shared effort, courage, and love. He had learned to accept help, to trust, and to open his heart. Grace squeezed his hand, a simple gesture carrying endless meaning. "This is our beginning," she said softly. "A home, a family, a future. Together." For the first time in years, Kola felt no fear. Only warmth, only hope, only the quiet. Enduring joy of having survived and chosen to live not alone, but with someone who mattered more than pride, more than fear, more than the cold itself. As the crowd of neighbors watched, their whispers replaced by smiles and nods, Kola and Grace stepped into the barn together, the horses around them calm and content. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside, warmth, trust, and love created a sanctuary that no winter could touch. And for Kola, the hardest lesson of all, letting someone in had become the greatest gift he had ever received. Together, they faced a future filled not with solitude, but with heart, hope, and family.